Somebody psychically attacks them. They send negative intention or they do spell work. Either way, emotional, psychic attack, or an actual ritual spell. The person feels it. They become aware for whatever reason. Oh my gosh, someone is psychically attacking me. Because they don't know what they don't know yet. They don't have all of the knowledge of working with somebody like you or working with somebody like me. And it's all very unknown, so it's scary. They immediately click into this emotion of fear. And then the fear is actually what gives that black magic 10 times, 100 times more power. Because then it's almost like the person is psychically attacking themselves. They go into these negative thought loops of like,
welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I'm your humble servant and seafood Taoist Master San Qing, and it's Christmas morning one more time. The universe has answered my calls for an incredible being, and I'm very grateful to welcome to the podcast Maya Zahira. Oh my goodness, this is where I got it wrong. Maya Zahira, the psychic protection expert. Did I butcher that one, or is that close? That was pretty good.
Yeah, that's close. You can say author and psychic protection expert. Yeah, but it's fine.
I'll do it one more time. I'll do it one more time. Maya Zahira, the author and psychic protection expert. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's wonderful to meet you. This is our first time meeting one another and getting to know each other. And I want to say this is the first podcast that I've done where I have no idea what you're going to ask me about, because you said you like to go organically, and I love that. I am super excited because it's like this grand adventure that we're going to go on together today.
I know. It's kind of like basically letting intuition guide you. But I mean, being in the area of mastery that you're in, it sort of leans into basically infinite possibilities, because from my perspective, the intuition and these sort of senses, whether it may be clairvoyance, mediumship, channeling, psychic abilities, there's just the potential is up to the individual, in my opinion. So I would like for you to really share with the audience a little bit about yourself leading up to this incredible moment right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I want to say you are so right that the subject of psychic protection is infinite. It's way more than like smoke cleanses and frankincense and incantation. It's like, oh my gosh, there's no end to the rabbit holes that we can go down together today. So we're going to leave it open to guidance, internal guidance as to where we go. So, hi, everybody. My name is Maya Zahira, and I am thrilled to be here. As Master San Qing said, I'm an author. I've written 2 books so far, but several on the way about psychic protection. But here's the thing. I was working as a spiritual guide and teacher and energy healing, even when I was in high school. So it's been well over 30, maybe 35 years. I'm not sure about the math, but I've been doing it for a long time. But here's the thing, 20 plus more of those years of doing that work, I was more of what you would call like a feel-good practitioner. And I want to say we need the feel-good practitioners. We need those who we can go to, who help us relax when we have a stressful job, who can help us work through things and ground in our body. I was doing all of that. It was all like Reiki and empowerment and feeling good and a lot of positive stuff. And all about like the positive messages, positive vibes, and all of that. And then in 2016, I came head on with the next level of my life mission, of my soul mission. I thought I had already found it in the spiritual work that I was doing and putting on retreats and all of that. I had no idea what I was in for because I really think I think sometimes we are put through spiritual boot camps, like a spiritual boot camp, like a training course, real life training course, where we are taken into difficult circumstances in order to learn um, the new material, in order to embody it. There's a different way of learning compared to learning from a master teacher or reading from a book or taking a course. And that is what happened to me because in 2016, I had a head-on collision with a false light entity. And I went to a colleague for a consultation. I wanted to get a second opinion from her about a situation that I was facing. And I really had no idea that there was anything to be worried about. This is someone who advertises that she channels angels, a council of 12 angels that she works with. I had no idea that she wasn't channeling angels. She was actually working with a being that was posing as these angels. Again, I wouldn't have gone to her if I had known that. I probably would have avoided the boot camp. But that was the point. I was supposed to go through that. And so it was about 6 weeks of living hell, of being under psychic attack and not knowing what was going on because this particular false light entity was a jinn. A jinn is a particular type of entity that some people think is only located in the Middle East because a lot of Middle Eastern folklore talks about jinn, but they're everywhere throughout our planet. And so jinn are particularly skilled at shapeshifting, and they are skilled at especially shapeshifting into multiple entities or kind of going into a rotation where it'll pretend to be a demon and then an angel and then Jesus and then and then fairies and it's so confusing. If someone doesn't know about this type of phenomenon, they will they will be so confused, and they actually love to create chaos and confusion. So I went through all these weeks of not being able to figure out what was going on, and I had no idea who it was coming from. So obviously, I'm skipping a lot of the nuances. This is a very complex story. And I ended up writing a book. That's my first book of the journey of how all of this happened. Because when people would ask me to tell this story, I would laugh ruefully and say, I need to just write a book because it would take, like when I would tell people, when I would retell it, it would take me 3 hours to tell them the story. Anyway, so I finally figured out, I had this epiphany. I had just been doing some yoga on the floor. And so I was in that more open meditative state. And that's when it suddenly came to me because I actually had this person's book on the dresser right there, this healer that I had gone to. And I suddenly saw the front of the book looked totally different than before. It had angel wings and clouds, but I saw that there were demon faces all over in the clouds. And that was what first alerted me that there was something wrong with this person, right? Or the energy that this person was working with. And that was my first red flag, my first big clue. And then, I finally was able to figure out all of the details. And then I was able to use some spiritual methods to free me from that entity that was attacking me. But here's another thing. Before I had figured all of this out, before I freed myself of this entity, I was reaching out to many of my colleagues, and many of them were masters, elders in the community who were engaging in various different kinds of spiritual teaching and guidance. And I'll just say this respectfully, I didn't get very much support. And that actually showed me how much this field of work is needed. This is why I'm so committed to helping people now with these issues, because everywhere I turned, master healers were telling me, well, have you just burned sage? Have you tried to burn sage? And I'd be like, did you think I didn't do that like weeks ago? Or they would tell me things like, well, negative entities don't exist. This is actually just a projection from your own unhealed shadow. And I knew that that thing existed. So I'm going to say, so trigger warning for anybody who's uncomfortable with really scary stuff. There was one night after I figured out a great deal of what was happening and I had more clarity. There was one night when I was woken up in the middle of the night from a deep sleep. And I was woken up because I felt something jar my body. I felt this physical jarring. My eyes flew open and I saw this pulsating light energy hovering above me. It was like this plasma-like energy. And then it didn't have a distinct form, but even though it didn't have a distinct form, I saw it reach forward energetically. It reached into my shoulders and it yanked. It literally tried to yank my soul. If I felt my soul in my body as it attempted to yank my soul out of my body. And it it actually sent a telepathic message into my third eye. And it said, don't mess with her, she's mine. And I thought, I wonder if because it was a male booming voice, I wonder if he is referring to the energy healer, my colleague, the energy healer, that I shouldn't, because she belongs to him, which is really creepy. But I was terrified. Okay. And then meanwhile, I have colleagues who are saying it's not real. So I had the trauma of being violently attacked by something that was outside of anything I thought was possible, because up until then, I believed the common feel-good belief that is entities can't harm you. I believed that. I believed that entities can't harm you. Well, this thing sure tried. And I think my stubbornness was what kept my soul in my body. So it did not succeed. But fast forward, I was able to clear this entity out. And then fast forward even more, over the next couple of years, I started working with clients and I experienced a lot of validation to what I had gone through. Because when you go through something that's so outside of your belief system, there's still this little part of your brain that says, what was that actually? Like, is there any chance? Like, it just doesn't seem real, right? Even though I know that it was real. But a couple years later, I had a situation with a client of mine who had the same kind of entity. And it wasn't the same entity, but it was the same type. And it came through the same way. I actually saw it. I heard its booming voice. It was a very unsettling experience with this client, but it was also very validating. And it proved to me even more. I already knew that what had happened to me was real, but I needed that 0.5% of doubt to be eradicated. And I had that experience. And then I've had several over the years with this type of entity. So I literally was catapulted from being this feel-good spiritual teacher, putting on retreats, and that was all wonderful. It was an important part of my work. But I got catapulted into this whole other level of work that honestly, it is not feel-good work, but it's very important, because when people need help with psychic protection, they need help. I've had people say to me, well, you should be writing books about this, that, or the other, or you should be doing work in this or that, because I don't need psychic protection. And I'm like, okay, that's great that you don't need it, I mean, everybody needs protection. Everybody needs to learn how to manage their energy, but they meant they weren't being attacked by an entity or under black magic spells or anything like that. I'm like, okay, great. That's great that you are not having that experience, but there is a percentage of the population who is who are in dire need of assistance, and there are spiritual workers who are working in this field who are helping people, but in my opinion, there are not enough. There are too many people. I've met too many clients over the years who've said that they've spent 10 years trying to find somebody. And they hired people who didn't know what they were doing. So so I'm just encouraging anybody out there who's a healer, we need more people doing this work. But my caveat is please don't work in this field if you don't know what you're doing, because it's dangerous. So get the proper training. But we need more people, more practitioners helping all these people who are dealing with attacks, and there are all these new agers who are telling them that it's not real.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know whether you're familiar with my background, but one of the lineages that I hold as a Taoist priest is specifically we're trained in exorcisms and all that kind of stuff. That I've been doing that for 30 years. 30 years ago, when I was doing it, people come to me for a psychotic episode, potentially being hospitalized for mental health issues. Now, I just channeled the Palladians. That's crazy. It's wild. All these crazy things, and they've got a discernment that could potentially be something other than what they think it is. And quite frankly, sometimes there's fire sales. Sometimes I have fire sales where I'll have years of continual repeated sort of incidents where people will come to me with this. And sometimes I won't have any issues at all, where I won't see them for years on end. And what I specifically become aware of is the very construct of the individual. So when you become really open, like training people in this stuff for years, people become very open. And I've had a lot of students that will come to channeling classes. They want to be the big badass exorcist. And they come in and they've got clingers, stage 5 clingers that are all different types of entities. One student would come in week to week with hundreds. And then you watch them sort of transform and morph into what really seems quite ominous. And it can to some. I've never had really a gauge of, and maybe that's why it's sort of like second nature for me. I've been fearless in this state. I've had many entities attempt to enter the physical flesh and whatnot, but you have to be, you cannot, and I agree with you when you say this, you cannot enter into this space if you have any doubt of any kind in relation to this sort of state. So if you're doubting yourself or you're afraid, probably go do something else. It's like, because it doesn't serve you well, because there is a level of what it does is works on the individual's ability and their duality. If you're working in a duality, these types of energies work really well on keeping you there. And that emotional state of fear will repeat itself, and they will feed very much from that emotional state. So, point in check was this one student. I remember my mother was in a channeling class. I was teaching it about 20 years ago, maybe 20, 30 students. And this woman, I noticed her shape-shifting, morphing, and I moved the student that was querying the entity she was channeling. And I was like, let me have a conversation with her. Well, it went south very quickly. And the student spun around 3 times and went across the room. And my mother went, what this stuff is real. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely, 100%. But the cautionary fact that I really appreciate what you're saying is you need to know what you're doing, but it's not, you can't come from a place of fear. This is not a specialized sort of like mastery that you have to, if you have doubt in yourself,
Mhm.
it's probably not the thing you should be doing, because it leaves you open to many variables which transmute into, physical ailments, mental disorders. I mean, it can go on. You cannot have a doubt in your mind. And I think that the power of your mastery in developing these skills from your own personal experience has brought you to that conscious state that makes it possible for you to really, capture the necessary techniques to hand to other people to help them understand what is really going on in their reality. But I mean, most people will dismiss this stuff. And I've got a dear friend of mine who's a Catholic priest, and he does exorcisms also, and house clearings and stuff of that nature. And there are a lot of people that are suffering from these sort of like what as you defined, attacks. And personally, I've never come across an entity that will not dissolve. I only ever had one that lasted about 3 hours. But generally speaking, the result is quite simple. They're looking for a completion of a whole outcome for the individual. And so for me, the observation is always the end result is an awareness of acceptance and love that comes with this entity. It doesn't come in any other form. So they can transmute into whatever you believe in, and they will work with that. That's where the eluding part where you were like, hang on, whoa, this woman's saying she's an angel channeler, and actually these are really low what I call low frequency energies that presented themselves as if it was like you're looking at this can and the can turns red and you go, what? And to everyone else, they're like, this is a green can. What are you talking about? But then there's a density, like that charge you and I are having right now. There is a density of energy that is second to none. It's like you can speak all you want, say, well, I can't see it or whatever. Well, you will feel the visceral kinesthetic density that comes with an interaction with these types of energies. So there are no coincidences that we're having this conversation today, and you're in good company that appreciates and values what you're saying, because there is an absolute demand and necessity for people to understand these things, but also they need to really look at their emotional state. And it's not from a mental disorder. It's from, this is the gateway to the very deeper nature of these entities. And they'll always feed off that, which I'm sure you've come to the conclusion of in your own journey, that that's the real, that's the kicker.
Yes. Yeah, I wanted to just add a little bit to what you shared. First of all, I'm really glad to hear about the exorcism aspect of your work. That totally makes sense. We're still new to getting to know each other. But I watched a couple of your videos a few weeks ago, and you were talking about the healing work, the healing aspect of your work. So, and how powerful that is. So it totally clicks and makes sense about the exorcism aspect of your work as well. And I wanted to add that just to what you were talking about, that if a person is going to do this kind of work, and I kind of feel like this was kind of what you were saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But if a person is going to work in the area of spiritual warfare or whatever you want to call it, they need to not only have the knowledge. The knowledge is only half of it. The other half is having a mastery, having that self mastery, having done a lot of shadow work or whatever you like to call it, working with your unhealed inner aspects, your unhealed inner wounds, your past traumas, your false limiting beliefs, all of that, working on being steadfast and working on all of those things. Because those who are in any spiritual field, whether it's spiritual warfare or something else, if they're not doing their inner work, it ends up making them an easy target for what I call the dark forces. The dark forces can just hook into that, create distortions, projections onto clients, and all sorts of dramas and that sort of thing that actually inhibits our ability to genuinely help our clients. So it's partly about the knowledge, and it's partly about the inner work. And it kind of sounded like that was what you were saying.
Yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
it's there's no room. Famous words from a dear friend of mine is a Buddhist monk. It's like there's no room for distortion. And the dukkha, which is what he calls it, is where you can it can become problematic if you're not very clear on what it is that you're experiencing, and it turns into a how do I put it? It turns into a distraction from what's really going on. And so when you become first person, third person, no person, that's when you can be truly this present moment and be at one with all things. That's when you can really see what's happening. And it's not a reflection of your own perception. And that's the mastery of how you really discern and affirm what's going on and the greater,
Mhm.
deeper nature of it. But once it is given life, it will replicate and become stronger the longer it inhabits a certain place, person, or thing. It will generate a greater charge, and it's just like an organism that's like like mold. It just keeps growing. It's like a weed. It'll just keep growing and getting stronger the more that people put attention to it. And if they're having situations where it's quite evident that they're being, as you put it, attacked, I mean, it can get very, very potent, very powerful, and
Mhm.
commandeer the very state of your awareness of what you think is your thoughts. And then all of a sudden now you're getting fleeting moments of a true nature of reality and then a distortion of it. And it becomes so overwhelming that it turns into, from my experience, a, a psychic, basically a psychotic episode. And you can't harness it. And so people then resort to what is more material, what is more, you know, 3D, a medication, a prescription. I don't have words for it. If they're coming to you, their intuitive nature has revealed the truth of what is going on. So they may, by coincidence, which there are none, have maybe their family or friends bring attention to it, and then they find you or they find myself. But ultimately, in the end, the result is always going to be um, a resolve. There will be a solution. I've never not had a solution to diminish and disperse and disintegrate these types of frequencies. But I would love to hear what, excuse me, your thoughts are on that.
So many thoughts. So there's something that you mentioned few minutes ago uh, about the person who said that she was angelic and she was channeling, or she was working and channeling with angels, and it turned out that that it was a low vibration or low density, I can't remember the term that you used, being. And when you mentioned that, it reminded me of something that I've noticed, this pattern that I've noticed with this phenomenon of low vibrational entities coming in and saying that they're high vibrational entities, and the situations in which a person is fooled. And so this pattern that I've seen again and again, and it actually seems really unfair that this happens, because what happens so often is that when someone is in dire straits and they're really suffering physically or emotionally, and they cry out for God, God, please help me, then actually sometimes from this energy of desperation, of despair, sometimes what shows up is not good. And I'm not saying that this is the person's fault. I don't know about you, but I've had my own moments in life of major despair. It's a part of our human condition. It can happen sometimes. Um, but this is something that I've seen, and this particular energy healer that we're mentioning, her own story is that she was experiencing severe depression, and she was so low emotionally that, as the story goes, she sat up, she could barely get out of bed. She sat up in bed and she begged God, she prayed, cried out, begged God, please help me. I need something to make me feel better. And what showed up was this being, which she thought were 12 angels. And so for 20 plus years, she has served those angels, who are not angels. It's this other being. But this is something that I've seen happen. I had it happen in a very small way myself, about a year or two after that, where I was having a particular struggle, and I did that same sort of prayer, like, please help me, I need help with such and such. And then what showed up was a trickster kind of entity that tried to guide me in the wrong direction. So that was a very bitter lesson, realizing, because it really sucks. I think it's very unfair that some of our lowest moments, when we are really in need, that is when some of this predatory kind of energy comes in. So it's not good, it's unfair, but we also need to remember that even in those low moments, which we all have, we're human beings, even in those low moments, we have to maintain discernment, because anything we have to maintain that discernment to thoroughly vet anything that shows up, any spiritual being, even thoroughly vetting the people that show up to help us, really honing our discernment skills even more. Um, and I know some people have to be extra discerning, because those trickster kinds of entities really try to show up for them. Other people kind of get it, they kind of get lucky, and like the nice people show up. But there are just some people who are a bit more targeted, and I don't say that from a victim vantage point, but just for lack of a better term, some people are just a little more on that radar. Again, not from a victim mentality, but just from a fact that a lot of people who've had trauma uh, in their childhood or adulthood, so emotional trauma, physical trauma, and even spiritual traumas, like prior spiritual warfare, maybe living in a haunted house when they were a kid, or experiencing abuse by their parents or caretakers. All of that really morphs the energy field, so that as an adult, if they don't know any better, they end up unintentionally being a magnet for those kinds of for the the negative spiritual activity, whether it's straight out negative or trickster. And this brings us back full circle. We were talking about how important it is for practitioners to do their shadow work, to do their inner work, but also for everybody, clients, students, just everybody walking around the planet. It's a good idea to be working on your stuff, because the more wounding we have, the more the easier it is for us to be targeted. So let's just give a pretend example. Let's say there's somebody who has had their life, they've had their different traumas. Pretty much everyone on the planet has had some trauma. I mean, it's just a it's just a fact on our planet. So let's say they've had their certain traumas that they've experienced in their life. They haven't really worked on healing those. And let's say that they have an unfortunate encounter where somebody decides to do some black magic against them. The person who's doing it is not coming from a place of integrity. They've decided that they're mad at that person, and so they're going to take it out on them by misusing their spiritual abilities. And so someone who already has a lot of trauma in their energy field, and their energy field isn't as strong as it could be, that black magic or psychic attack is going to hit that person a lot harder. It's going to have more of an impact on them, as opposed to somebody who has worked through their traumas. There's not as much for that psychic attack to hook onto. And so it might have a more subtle effect on somebody who's done more of their healing work. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean the way generally speaking, the way Taoist magic works, whenever we're in that space of casting magic, it's kind of like different degrees of understanding that it is predicated on the construct of the individual. So if you operate in duality, that's where all this stuff really shines. So when you're operating in duality and you have an emotional sort of a state which puts you in a suggestible position, then things start to really go in all different directions. So when I'm casting magic, it's more a general construct of where the energies are directed. So for example, I don't specifically go and target a place, person, or thing, but more the construct of how the energy is altering the very dimensions that we're operating in. And within Taoism, we work in every dimension at once. It really varies.
Right.
It's an inner cultivation. But what that does is it subjects the individual. So say, for example, someone has ill intent towards me due to the construct of the magic that I cast. I don't even experience whatever it is that they're projecting, but they
Right.
receive it back tenfold.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
I'm not even aware of their ill intent. It just all of a sudden they're whatever their intention is now multiplied by 10. So, and I've seen some crazy stuff that all of a sudden materializes in this admission of like, I'm really sorry, I can't believe this happened, and it's wild. And so, it's really important to get into a place of regulated sort of state of awareness, and that all starts with the human condition, and the emotional content is kind of critical, and how you're able to balance that out. And as you mentioned, oppression, possession, sort of it goes in that order: oppression,
Yes.
depression, sorry, oppression, depression, and possession. And so you
Yes.
get, the more you find people that like, I just need to be alone, I just need time for myself, you will find that that's problematic for the individual, and they're already dealing with a monologue, well, attempted monologue, but it gets into a dialogue that is not of the highest state. And you'll see that that sort of behavior is repeatable throughout their life, that they do more and more of this, and that will present itself and give segue to a lot of different opportunities for this type of like construct. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And as you were talking about the way that you do magic, I was imagining this natural field, like a natural force field, you could call it, that would emanate from you just as a result, even of the daily practices that you're doing. So that, like you said, you don't even have to be informed intuitively that someone's sending something, because it's just taken care of and it bounces back and the person gets instant karma. They
Yeah.
they receive um And how I see karma is, um, it's natural consequences. It's like if someone has sent something nasty and then it comes back to them, that's just simply what they're sending out into the world coming back to them. And and it's not me causing it. It's not you causing it. It's what they are sending out.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's natural.
Oh,
Mhm.
100%. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that word karma because within a Taoist model, we don't see, yin and yang is all the humanistic construct of this duality is comprised of yin and yang, but that doesn't mean good and bad. It's another
Mhm.
energy. That yin energy is most powerful. And when we
Mhm.
cultivate that and we separate the electric from magnetic within our internal alchemy practices, yin is the source of all things. And that magnetic fluidity, just like the charge we're getting right now as we're attuning ourselves to each other and realizing that magnetic fluidity is a deeper understanding of how powerful the true nature in a bigger picture of the source of all things. But you have to be at one. It doesn't. It's like there's a progression. Everyone starts somewhere, but we need the audience to understand there's a progression to this, and it's not to be disheartened and go, well, I'm fearful. Well, of course, you need to realize that you need to create a cultivational practice that can start
Yes.
to regulate your mental emotional state, which then is a reflection of your physical state, and of course ultimately unifies the spiritual state within this 3D reality. So it's kind of like a sort of a progressive development. And by coming across Maya and her skills of being able to develop these sort of things, you're able to enjoy and experience this reality as however you see it, without the hindrance of what I call low watt type of like energy. And the black, when you mention black magic, I find that interesting because so many of the people that I work with from the Asian culture, specifically, many of my students and clients come from all parts of Asia because it's so steeped in superstition. There is a very deep sort of like understanding, and the black magic stuff is pretty weak. Anyone that's sort of going there, I've never come across someone that's got a massive charge or any sort of evidence that they're going to be the ultimate sorcerer equivalent to an admission of what we call God, energy, universe, Buddha, Tao, whatever you want to call it. It's I just haven't witnessed it. To say that it doesn't exist, well, anything is possible, but I've never come across it. So
Mhm.
you would have to have a real mastery. The only person I ever came across a mastery that resulted in their own physical demise was, you know, um, a guy I came across decades ago. And I just started, my training, and I got it heavily into clairvoyance. This is 30 years ago. And he didn't, he goes, give me a reading. And I gave him a reading, and he was like, this is not the common response, but I kind of revealed things almost instantaneously as if I, 1,000 lives before I just realized who I am. Poof. And I gave him a reading. I said, wow, from what this information is telling me is you need to stop feeding this entity that's giving you the ability to do remote viewing because it wants to kill you.
Mhm.
And he
Mm.
was like, whoa, whoa. And he was a teacher. Him and his girlfriend were a teacher. And
Mhm.
and I said, and your girlfriend's doing the same thing. And he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You need to just let's have this conversation privately. You don't need to share this with the rest of the people around here. And I was like, listen, I'm just
Mm.
going by, tuning in. I
Mhm.
wasn't really concerned by it. I wasn't afraid of it, but it was like I instantly got that hit of information, and it was dead on accurate. And of course, ultimately, 6 months later, I was holding him in my arms, barely a shell of a man, and he died. he died of horrible brain cancer. Even though I had told him, hey, listen, if you don't stop this, it's going to take your life, and you're trading it for this psychic power, this superhuman remote viewing skill. And that was the end result. Now, I'm not using this as a fear tactic for anyone. I just need you to understand that was part of his construct. And when you bring it in, there's always going to be someone. If you ding the bell, some entity will come and go, hey, sure, I'm over here.
Yeah.
What do you need? What's on the menu? Oh, this is what you want. Okay, sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, the fear to fearless component is critical. And, there is a developmental skill that I teach people to get to the fearless state and to realize that there is no need, but you have to, there is an in-between state. There's several steps to that. So, and while you're on that journey of developing and cultivating those skills, you will be subject to your perception of reality. And so don't be, don't, you can achieve these skills, you can develop these skills, but realize that there is a progression. And while you're on that progression, you need to be a little bit more than average mindful of things that can become problematic. I don't ever drive people with the fear factor, because they can change that, but they need to be completely conscious of what's going on. It doesn't have to be the be all or end all. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I would love to. I want to talk about fear.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's easy to say, don't come from a place of fear, right? So it's easy to say that, harder to actually do it. If you are coming from a place of fear, it's hard to turn that off. And it sounds like you have some fantastic methods for helping your people to move past that. One of the things that I've observed is that whether it's black magic, a negative spell work, even a negative entity, like whatever you want to call it, a negative force coming your way. A lot of time, or actually every time I've ever observed the black magic, the spell, the whatever, it doesn't actually have very much power in and of itself. And it's been interesting. I've observed this with, probably 1,000, I don't know, a lot of people. So I've seen this pattern where somebody psychically attacks them. They send negative intention or they do spell work. Either way, emotional psychic attack or an actual ritual spell. The person feels it, they become aware for whatever reason. Oh my gosh, someone is psychically attacking me. Because they don't know what they don't know yet. They don't have all of the knowledge of working with somebody like you or working with somebody like me. And it's all very unknown, so it's scary. They immediately click into this emotion of fear. And then the fear is actually what gives that black magic 10 times, 100 times more power, because then it's almost like the person is psychically attacking themselves. They go into these negative thought loops of like, just all of these negative thought patterns, and that everything that happens, they think is part of the psychic attack. And that actually expands and expounds upon the attack. So the person sending the black magic only has to send this little bit, and then it hits the person gets activated with fear, and then it blows up times 100. And so this is why it is so important to not get overactivated in fear. If you don't have the knowledge of how to ground and how to be in your power, if you don't have that knowledge yet, it's understandable to feel some fear, but then connect right away with one of us. If you don't have the knowledge of how to protect yourself or how to get back into your power, because the last thing that you want to do is get into that energy or emotion of fear, because again, the psychic attack itself rarely has very much power in and of itself. And actually, the person who's sending the psychic attack, usually their intent is to activate fear and to make the attack look much bigger than it actually is. And as I mentioned earlier, I see this with entities as well. The whatever kind of negative entity, there's so many different kinds. Oftentimes the entity isn't very powerful, but it wants you to think that it is. It wants you to be afraid so that you'll forget that you're more powerful than it is, or just as powerful, or more powerful. So what I recommend to people is to connect with a mentor, connect with the information, the information, and also the ability to do the inner work. Because when you don't have the knowledge or the know-how of what all this stuff is, and then and then something happens in your life, and you don't like, I think the lack of knowledge and the not understanding what's happening is the most scary part. Like when I went through some entity attacks when I was younger, I didn't know what was happening, and so it was more scary. But if something like that, if I were to encounter a demon like I did when I was young, now I'd be like, okay, I see what that is, and then I take this and this action, and then it's done. Like there's no fear, there's alertness and awareness, but there's no fear. So as the saying goes, knowledge is power, but it's really not just knowledge, but it's like embodiment of that knowledge. So by embodiment, I mean like having the information, but also being so grounded and anchored in who you are, who you know yourself to be. Eventually you get to the point where you know your own power. You know that some rinky-dink little demon or whatever that's trying to pretend like it's scary, because it's pretending. Some rinky-dink thing comes along and tries to scare you. You go, oh, no, 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 no. Because you know you have embodied the knowledge of psychic protection. You've embodied the knowledge of who you are and your power. And I'll say one more thing about our power. In our culture, we're taught to give our power away to others. We're indoctrinated into that even at a young age. And this is not entirely a bad thing, because we should look to our parents for guidance so that we don't put our hand on a hot stove. So we need protection, we need some guidance, but it's taken to an extreme where we are taught to look to the authorities, our teachers, our caregivers, but it's never, with most families, it's not cultivated to, it's not taught, we're not taught to gradually cultivate our own inner guidance, so that by the time we're 5 years old and we're developing cognitively to a certain point, that we get to decide, is this right for me or is this right for me? Instead, mom says, I'm telling you, this is what you're doing, and there's no question about it. So we're taught to look to our authorities. They have the answers, and we don't get to choose. We don't get to develop our own inner discernment. And then when we go to elementary school, our teachers are the ones that we're supposed to obey. And again, there needs to be some rules. I was a classroom teacher years ago. I know it would be like total anarchy if we didn't have like 5 rules that, like, please don't do these 5 things. So there needs to be some rules to keep some kind of calm in the classroom. But when I was a school teacher 25 years ago, the teachers were not teaching the kids how to cultivate their inner guidance, how to find what was right for them. And what I see in adults is that it's a continuation of that pattern. So they will look to, and I know that both of us are mentors. I think mentors are super important. But I think that as adults, people will look to a spiritual teacher as a kind of guru, where they give their power away and they're still not cultivating their own inner guidance. They're looking to the guru or the yoga master or the whatever master, any kind of spiritual teacher, or they're constantly checking with their spirit guide. Oh, I don't know the answer to that. Let me check my spirit guide. And they're never, it's so fascinating. I've talked with people where I ask them a question, well, what do you think is right for you? First thing they say is, let me check with my spirit guide. And I'm like, no, what do you, what, what is your inner guidance? But they've literally never learned how to do that. It's part of our cultural construct. So when we talk about how important it is to be in your power, it's definitely something that a lot of people have to have to build up from square one, because they just weren't raised that way. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the fear model is really quite simple. I mean, you cannot control the masses without having this
Mm.
ominous overshadowing, which comes just from the general populace, and the group think, which is actually not a positive thing. It's more a psyop. And so
Yes.
you get into the psyop, and then of course, what happens? All of a sudden you get really afraid of three-letter organizations that are dictating the very state of your being, due to certain cycles within a annual year. And I'm not giving it any energy, but you know what I'm talking about. And this is how you control the masses. And it's all fear-based. There's no way for them to control this many people in a population. They just don't have it. So if you take someone into the town square and you beat the crap out of them and lynch them over the local tree, then everyone else will start falling in line. And so just going back to and agreeing with what you said, it's like the fear is how you're being controlled, and being controlled by a sort of like a societal sort of norm now. And I don't think it's ever left us, but it's more really quite clear in the world stage that we're having, specifically because people are making 2024 such the big spiritual sort of revolution in many ways. And my personal teachers that I channel, Latsu and Three Pure Ones, and all the people that I work with directly, are they're not they always resort back to the same thing, which is Latsu was asked this very thing. What are you projecting for 2024? Oh my goodness, death and destruction, right? And his answer was, imagine you're like a grain of sand, asking the beach, what are you doing today? Now, if you fall back into the beach, you'll be realized as all things. Now, the simplicity of this is quite simple. You can access all things and be aware this present moment. But this is where, telling someone to be fearless is conceptual until they are able to master a skill. And the mastery comes in the cultivation. And that's what we do within Taoism that's so powerful, is the mastery of cultivation. And when you're able to do this, the evidence is in the 3D reality. Your mental emotional state. The first thing that I teach people is your emotions don't control you, you control your emotions. And so many people get sort of like, what? Yeah, like this is nothing more than a framework of your construct of your personality and the sum of your life experiences. And as referring to the very earlier conversation we had, which is, the trauma, the shadow work, all these things that people are perceiving as the crutch and the very core of their experience. Until you're able to equalize that and see it for what it is, it will dictate the gateway of what things come in and out of your perception of reality, constantly back and forth. It's always going to be there until you're able to really see things. And there's no absolute. Everyone always says this is the absolute truth. When that happens, I always tell people, about face or walk in the other direction, because the development of the absolute truth is the individual's journey of realizing who they really are. And that's that power that you were speaking of, which is the truth teller, their intuitive instinct that comes from the source of all things, the high intelligence that is the life force that gives you life. That is that true source information that they detach themselves from. And that comes from here. And you'll know when you're humming, because if you're contracting, you know that's a great indicator of this is not right, or you're expanding. I mean, we're having, these amplitude of energy charges as we speak through this very experience right now. And that's an attunement. That's a resonance. But, this is a constant thing that if you're not clear on what you're doing, you will be misled. But then that also comes from the framework of understanding there's something to be misled, which then comes from the emotional state of what you believe. And then what you believe is the only truth you need to be concerned with. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I would just add like a little piece right in there of what you were talking about a minute ago about some of the powers on earth, like the three-letter organizations, etc., um, utilizing fear to control the masses. Another aspect that uses fear to control the masses is religion. And I do believe that religion can bring, like, it's not all bad. I think that it can bring comfort to people. There are certain personalities that
Yeah.
really, that really do well with like having that construct, right? But I think you and I would agree that fear is very much utilized in a lot of religions. This fear that if you don't do this, what we tell you, then this bad thing will happen. Like you'll go to hell or whatever the religious construct is. And then that keeps people in line as well. So that's just another like piece of the societal control element.
No, I think you're making a
Mhm.
valid point. It's like a cycle, but I think the people right now, people are really being misled, because through human history, generally the cycles are spirituality, atheism, religion, and you just go through it. What people seem to forget is they come across an original artist, a prolific, profound thought leader that's a musician, composer extraordinaire that polarizes, incredible musicians. And when they come across someone like that, like Vanilla Ice, all of a sudden they forget, where did he get this incredible music from? Oh my
Mhm.
goodness, that's just so original. I've never come across a song as powerful as the original song that Vanilla Ice released back in 1992 or 3, which was some ridiculous like ripoff of like Freddie Mercury and David Bowie. And so, oh my goodness, he's so profoundly unique. People seem to quickly, generation after generation, forget or be
Mhm.
misled away from understanding there was a history that led us up to this point. And if you're not going deeper into identifying, okay, I want to consider reincarnation, incarnation, I want to consider past lives, I want to consider a greater understanding of the nature of who I am, then you're left with what's in front of you, which is human history. And if you're left with human history, do yourself a favor, at least take a closer look at that and give yourself the ability to then take all the chess pieces and make a more informed decision about your reality by realizing that all these things are constantly being reused over and over again in the experience and the simulation you're having right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, it does. And I'm going to be a little bit general here on purpose because I very much believe in respecting, individual people's religious practices and everything. I consider myself or I've used the term interfaith, even though I don't fit into any certain box. I work with people of all faiths. But one thing that I've noticed is that people will get really attached to their own religious beliefs in a way that they don't realize that they have ideas about the world and ideas about reality that are based on like a verse from their holy book or a teaching from their religion, not realizing that that's just one of like how many religions are on the planet. It's like I don't know. It's this huge number. I don't
think the
know.
last time I checked, it was over 4,000.
Okay, I knew it was in the thousands. While it's like this underlying assumption that their faith is the correct faith, even though they're not trying to be that way. It's this is that, well, this verse says this about our reality, therefore it's true. Well, there's 4,000 other religions that might have other ideas. And the other point that you made about looking back at history, that a lot of people fail to look back before their faith started to see that, oh, my faith is actually a recycled version of 500 other faiths or deities or stories, storylines, themes. There are themes that keep repeating. And so people don't like they don't see it from that bigger scope. And that's okay. Like I don't need people to see it in whatever way. But I'm in this perspective lately where I'm just noticing this about people, that they make these assumptions about reality, not realizing that they're in this little mini dome. It's like this little world that is their faith that they grew up with. I was eating lunch with a colleague and she started quoting Bible verses and saying, well, the Bible states this and this about the world, and therefore it is true. And I said, well, that's just one truth. And it was like her mind was blown, like she didn't understand when I said, well, that's one way of looking at it. That's one truth. But you're assuming that this is our construct reality because you've always been raised in this faith and you're forgetting that there could be other possibilities. I just use that as an example. We could fill in the blank with any holy book or any religion.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I always start with,
Hmm.
if you dismiss someone else's belief system, you dismiss your own. And so
Hmm.
there's within Taoism, we always remind people there's a million ways up the mountain. But within a Taoist path of journey, the mountain has one side. One is yin, one is yang. You're moving towards the peak and having them merge as one and realize all is everything. But you can't access that unless you're in the present moment. And so that will come in many forms that are validated through your experience, whether it's manifestation, magic, or physical healing, which is my personal favorite that I've become sort of, it's second to none what I've been doing for over 30 years. And witnessing that becomes, part of the validation of what is your truth, because you get to a resonance and you cannot obtain that without understanding everything is energy, vibration, frequency, and then you obtain that resonance, and then it bears the fruit of this realization that is not a figment of your imagination, but it can come in a mental, emotional, physical, spiritual transformation. But that is how you are able to realize it. And so, I was talking to a guy earlier who was on my podcast, and he spent probably 30 years traveling the world training under masters of many different types of like supernatural abilities. Some of them I've also trained under. And, being able to acquire levitation, stopping your heart, telekinesis, pyrokinesis, mental, emotional, physical healing. These are all variables, and they're really powerful to be able to harness and concentrate an energy to do that. But channeling is like this sort of thing where even Taoism, and I would have to say all sort of belief systems start with this very notion of understanding that people are are getting a direct source information. Within Taoism, within the Chinese culture as you know it, it all started from the Yellow Emperor thousands and thousands of years ago that used the universe to channel the information that created the construct of the Chinese culture, including old Taoist internal alchemy, Chinese medicine. Everything was from his relationship with the universe. And this is pretty much the theme or understanding of what Taoism is, and it's the affinity for that very source, which is all things, which we call the stillness between the breath in and the breath out, which we call the Wu Ji. And with it, that acknowledgement of the Wu Ji is the mother of all things, which is the Tao. And that's where people are like, did you just say the mother? Oh, damn straight I did. I ain't playing. I know where this comes from. And people kind of get a little, wow, well, that's kind of weird. And in most cases, I have most of the students are people that seek me out. They travel the world looking for Taoist teachers. And most of them are women and native women of Asia and in each of the Eastern cultures, because they're being removed from the opportunity to understand the inner alchemy and being able to give them the access to cultivate and train in that. But when it comes to channeling, there is a lot of people right now. 30 years ago, if someone came to me, they would be escaping a potential admission to a psych ward, and they need answers, right? And now today, you could literally open Yelp and find 500 healers, 500, magic people, Reiki, energy, you name it. They're
Psychics.
psychic.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really exciting. I think it's exciting people are discovering that they can access this. And 30 years ago, I used to make it my business seeking out these wannabe charlatan psychics and healers. Now I'm having a tough time. I could throw a stone and find someone that's really tapping into a source of information. But it's like, it comes now back down to the subject of what we're speaking of in this conversation is, what is it? And where are you getting it from? And what is it representing that would provide you enough validation that it's of a higher source of frequency, that it could be reflected as that within this 3D reality? And this is where there can be this dukkha, this distortion that we speak of. And, channeling is like another thing. So I was just telling you about this other guy. So there's a thing that we normally do within channeling, and he used to be a Taoist practitioner, so it kind of made it quite simple. But if someone claims they're channeling an entity or a high frequency energy, we normally put their hand over a flame, and if you're really embodying that frequency, it will not burn. That's just an old Taoist practice that we have. And then furthermore, he goes even further, where he carries his own verified knife, and he'll draw it across the skin of the supposed channeler. And if it cuts, then you're not in that frequency, and it's not happening. And most people will not get to that level. Just within the mastery of being a priest, part of developing the skills of being able to move energy and transmute it, one of the completions is taking a bottle of sealed alcohol, i.e. normally it's vodka, and you have to remove the alcohol from the vodka bottle. And then you open the bottle and you drink it within 60 seconds. Now, if that alcohol is still present, you're either going to the hospital, dying from alcohol poisoning or whatnot. But there's a standard. There's not a delusion. There's a mastery that comes with this. And it can be very ancient, but it's a realization, whether you're realizing who you are in this lifetime, if you believe in that, or a deeper understanding of the information, that it can be repeatable through your journey, and not just sort of like, passing words or ideas within a construct that never really bears fruit. And I think that's what's really important for anyone watching this, is coming to that person like yourself that's had all this experiential evidence. This is not just like, Maya's, training under someone or reading a book on it or doing what the experience in my opinion, and this is how I operate, even with all the training that I have, the experience, the evidence is paramount. That's the most important thing, because I can teach you all this stuff in words, but if you can't show me it, then it means nothing. And
Mhm.
I'm a show me guy. I want to see it. If someone claims to be able to do something, show me. I'll show you anything and everything that I teach, because there's no point in teaching someone something if you can't do it yourself. It's kind of
Mhm.
like it's a broken promise. It's like, oh, I kind of got it conceptually, but here it is in this form, and I'll help you find it. But it's really important, if you're going to take on that position to help people realize who they are, that you must be able to perform these things yourself. That's from my perspective. I don't know about you, but what are your thoughts on that?
In response to what you were sharing, one thing really stands out, and it is the importance of working with a mentor who who has the ability to actually do what they're teaching. And I think that that's the difference between somebody who has maybe just learned something in a book, so they understand it conceptually, and then they turn around and teach it, compared to somebody who has practiced or gone through the experiences, and now it's embodied wisdom. These are things that they have mastered, that they know how to do, and then they are teaching those things to others. There's a big difference. And I think I might have mentioned that I was a school teacher many, many years ago. So I've been a teacher in all sorts of different ways over the years. And I really, just from the standpoint of a teacher, I really believe in having mentors and having teachers and choosing them wisely, choosing mentors and teachers who have that embodied wisdom. I think, sure, it's fun to maybe go to an afternoon workshop with somebody, whoever, just because the topic sounds interesting. But if you're going to really study something and go deeply, sign up for a 6-month program, or, do some longer term program. I think it's really important to know, can they do the things that they are teaching? And it sounds so elementary, like, well, of course you would want them to do that. But I think that um, as potential students or potential mentees, we get our hopes up. We see someone's picture online and we say, "Oh, that looks really interesting," and then we want to jump in and sign up. I think it's just really important to not put our power into that person, but to maintain our own power and to ask those important questions. Where does this person's knowledge come from? What is their story? What kind of person are they? Are they also coming from a place of integrity? Because there are a lot of practitioners and teachers who, in my opinion, are not coming from a place of integrity. They're coming from another place. That's kind of another rabbit hole. but I think it's important, before, like as we're choosing a teacher, to not immediately give our power away, or to ever give our power away to them, but to
Never.
always be asking those questions, like, who is this person? Where have they obtained their knowledge? And do they walk their talk? And then even when you begin studying with that person, you never give your power. It's like, here's where people trip up so much. And it's, again, part of our cultural construct, that maybe they stay in their power until they sign up for the thing. And then once they start showing up for the class, it's like they give that person all their power, that the person um, can tell them what to do and they just do it, you know, without question, without question. I don't know about you, but for me, when my students ask questions, and even if they say, like if they have maybe a different way of seeing it than what I've taught, I love it when they do that. I'm like, yes, you're thinking for yourself. If they start to act like they're just following everything that I say, I get really concerned.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I always remind people your truth is the only truth you need to be concerned with. And
Hmm.
most authoritarians get very puckered up and twisted. But that's giving people the power of deciding what their truth is. That's dangerous. What if someone thinks differently? Well, that's the whole point of it now, isn't it? Because the true validation of all this stuff is not in the thinking. I always tell people if you're thinking, you're not knowing. If you're knowing, you're feeling. And so there's the visceral kinesthetic like charge that comes with a knowing that cannot be measured in a book. If I always remind people, you're coming from biology, psychology, neurology, physiology, you're very limited in your starting point. You must come with this student is the teacher is the student, and furthermore, all thoughts of your mind are not yours. And then furthermore, from one of my teachers, the Jade Emperor, when you accept you know nothing, you know everything. And so when you sort of like start embodying this stuff, you will quickly level up in an environment where I teach people stuff that can, and I'll remind people, I woke up pretty quickly 30 years ago. I'm beginning my journey, and I pretty much accessed things instantaneously that most people would spend many lifetimes trying to acquire. It was just realizing and reminding myself who I was, and then tuning into that. And so when it came to physical healing, that was like the gateway, watching physical flesh go from gangrenous back to pink and flesh color. That was just my gateway. The first thing that ever happened to me off the gate. And so I had this, I realized that, okay, I have all the techniques, all these, I've got thousands of different techniques that are taught to me by Taoist practices. But the reality is what I attribute all this to is being childlike in your nature and taking things at face value. And that's a very fine line from where you're coming from, because you're speaking on things where, hang on a second, you got to be able to discern. I feel like there's a level. So you get to a place where you level the emotional state out, and then the more and more you embody everything as is, and you start letting, literally like my daughter's favorite movie, Frozen, let it go, let it go. You find how quickly you can access that. And from a neurological standpoint, it's like the 4-minute mile. I'll teach students stuff that is a very deep mastery of concentrated energy. And because I've showed them that and they've experienced it, their neurology speaks to them instantaneously, being able to replicate that very state. And so when you start to understand these things, you embody that. And then when you embody that, all of a sudden, things like emotions are quite secondary when you realize where they're coming from. So, of course, everything is a thought, feeling, and emotion. That's the beginning and end of all things. That's it. Everything's thought, feeling, and emotion. Now, wisdom is when you can basically dissolve the emotion and the feeling, and you can reflect on whatever it is that you've experienced in your natural born life, creating wisdom. And so the emotion and feeling are not dictating your very perception of reality. And that's just part of energy. And that's all energy is it's attached to a thought, feeling, and an emotion. And that generates the energy, which has a vibration, and it has a frequency, and then a resonance. And if you maintain it for long enough, you will either call in a horde of lower frequency, low watt entities, or you will be embodied as whatever you call it, Christ consciousness, God, Tao, Buddha, universe. It's about holding the line. And so people don't realize how easy it is to hold that line of high resonance, because they don't realize how hard they've worked to create this low resonance that they're holding on to forever in the form of an emotional state that is harboring and festering these entities that are growing from a day-to-day basis. What are your thoughts on that?
Hmm. Actually, I wanted to turn it around and ask you a question, and then
Mhm.
I'll comment on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
But it's related to what you were just talking about. I wrote this down so I would get your exact quote. You said, "All thoughts in your mind are not yours." That really struck me because from my work, which is, I mean, we have different work and a little bit different perspectives. It really struck me because it makes me think of certain things in my line of work. And I have a feeling that your perception of that, it might be similar, but maybe not quite the same. All thoughts in your mind are not yours. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, when you have an evidence experience of healing, to do that, you can be no place, person, or thing. And so within that embodies a resonance of a frequency that is beyond this world, beyond the electromagnetic field that people operate in within a duality. And so that resonance is evident, that is sort of in the form of chi, prana, God energy, life, life force, this universal state. And from that, you can be quite clear on what you're able to manifest or create within that state. Now, when you're not in that state, you are coming from your personality, or you're coming from another form of information that is coming through this basically all it is a tuning fork and a radar that is taking in information. So you can embody the personality which is handed to you as part of your life's journey in this human experience, and you can realize that. And part of the mastery is identifying with the sum of your life experiences and realizing that that is like underwear. You can take it on and off. And to be that present moment is where all things happen. Past, present, and future is happening right now. But then to be able to actually do that and not just be, as you mentioned, referenced before, oh, people just say, just don't be fearful, or don't do this, or embody love or love. I mean, love is subjective until otherwise noted. So again, you're getting a baseline of love because all of a sudden you realize consciousness. So let's just say love is an example. Love to most people could be razor blades and bunny rabbits. To someone else, it could be unicorns and rainbows. But when you continue to expand your consciousness, and it's evident through the energetics are so palpable because you don't have any space in here when you are completely clear and you're running this chi, this Tao, God, Buddha. There's no room for something else. And if you're witnessed when I do when I do any type of exorcism, the the channel, the energy is locked up with a very low frequency. Like there's nothing going on. Like because these energy centers are very palpable, they're a portal, they're a vortex. And if you don't regulate them, they will become stagnant and they will manifest themselves in all different types of ways that will present themselves to you as your own ideas. Because when you're a five,
Yeah.
guess what? Mommy didn't give you 3 cookies and a glass of milk, and you are stuck with that trauma, as you put it. There is a trauma there. It's evidence-based. Every time you think about it, you feel a certain way. This is part of why I think it's very important what you speak of when it comes to, if you call it the shadow work, the
Mhm.
regulation, the you call it protection. You're getting in a state where you're being able to regulate the energies. And that's where, as I mentioned before, the dukkha, the distortion, starts to diminish itself. And so the truth is, this is nothing more than a tuning fork, and that all thoughts of your mind are not yours because you are getting a subjected, recorded personality experience which does not represent you in the true sense of the word. if you understand that. And this all is conceptual. As you develop your skills, you start to expand your consciousness and realize, oh my goodness, if I'm consciousness, I'm not of this body. That's right. And if you're not of this body, what can harm you? Nothing. When you truly understand that this is nothing more than an anchor to this reality. I mean, that question in of itself is a big one, but you know that it's all information coming in at all times. You can be hijacked by walking into Starbucks and ordering a coffee, and someone's having a bad day, and they give you attitude. You walked in with a 10 and said, "Good morning, can I get a venti?" And the person behind the counter is like, "Yeah, what else you want? Do you want milk with that?" And you abruptly react to the state of that person, and all of a sudden your 10 goes to an 8. They talk to you again, it goes to a 6. You end up being at a 5. Before you walk out of the coffee shop, you're at a 3, and now you're operating at this 3 perception of reality due to someone else's mental emotional state, because you decided to embody that. And so again, that's how easily you can be hijacked if you are operating in a duality. And so they're all words until further notice. You have to be able to cultivate and expand yourself, that you're able to move and discern and affirm whatever you're experiencing. But again, it's a cultivational thing. But I think what's most important is when someone gets a heads up of just that, just from an idea perspective, it's an epiphany. People just go, whoa, hang on a second. Wow, that actually kind of makes sense to me. I can follow through and look back at certain events and go, I walked into this room and I felt this vibe. I don't know what it was, but the person in the corner of the room was really angry. Well, how do you know that? Because I could feel it. And then once I left there, I started to feel kind of angry and I felt conflicted. And the next interaction I had with another human being, I wanted to create conflict. And then when you start tracking it back, you go, hang on a second, I just filtered someone else's experience due to the porous nature of who we are. Until further noted, you must understand that all these things can be developed, all these things can be expanded on, and you can start to find a real powerful framework that works for you. But initially, you're sort of like realizing that, oh my goodness, there's so many holes in the very perception of my reality right now, that it's not as I thought it was, not even close. And so when you start to understand this stuff, it becomes very clear and very calming, very grounding, very wholesome. And you start to embody it and start becoming in the knowing, which is so critical. It's like you need to know who you are and where you're going. And that comes from being whole in this energetic aspect, because when the energy is flowing, you will feel the connection. It'll be second to none. Did that answer the question at all? I don't know whether it did.
Yes, I think it did. And I wrote down some notes of things that I wanted to add. That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you. So the original question, actually, I'm going to change the original phrase from "all thoughts in your mind are not yours." I'll alter it a little bit and say, many of your thoughts and emotions are not necessarily coming from you. They're not necessarily yours. So I'm gonna get into teacher mode, and I'm gonna just break it down into categories, because that's how my mind works. So I've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways, 5 different reasons why we might perceive reality in a certain way. So this experience is happening when we go into Starbucks or walk into a room or something, and we have thoughts and feelings about it. The first way that we might respond with our thoughts or feelings is with our true self. These are actually our own feelings and thoughts coming from that higher perspective. You might even call it the higher self. I don't tend to use that term because a lot of people think of the higher self as this disembodied spirit floating way up in way in the cosmos. And I like to think of like your true self as being this very anchored and grounded aspect of you. So your embodied self, your true self, the thoughts and feelings that you're having that are coming from your true self. But the second category would be the thoughts and feelings that are coming from your, I'll call it your unhealed self, your wounded self, that you had this experience with your mother when you were young. You didn't get the cookies and the milk that you wanted. And therefore, when you walk into Starbucks and someone says something a certain way, or you don't receive your order in the way that you wanted it to, it either consciously or unconsciously brings back the feeling or the memory about mom not giving you the cookies and milk. And then suddenly you're having really negative thoughts about the person next to you, or you're in a bad mood or whatever. And if you're not, well, and we all have those unhealed like aspects. We're always working on it. If you're not self-aware, you'll have that unhealed self response, and you won't know why you're in a terrible mood going forward through the rest of the day. But if you are self-aware, you go, oh, I just realized that my mood shifted, and I know why. And either you can work on shifting it right then with whatever methods that you have for self-clearing, or if that's not the appropriate space, then you work on it later. But that the unhealed self is another perspective that's going to alter our thoughts and our feelings. But then, as you mentioned, with the person in Starbucks who is in a bad mood or depressed or whatever's going on with them, some of our thoughts and our feelings are actually coming from the people around us. So if we are somebody who tends to be a bit empathic, where we tend to absorb and feel the feelings of the people around us, then we might feel the feelings or think some of the thoughts that somebody in the grocery store who just walked right by us was having. And if we're not grounded and self-aware, we might think that those thoughts or feelings are our own. So we suddenly feel angry, and we think that it's our own anger, or whatever the thought or the feeling might be. We think that it's our own. Sometimes it actually, there is a little kernel of it that is our own. We're upset about something, but someone walks by and they're angry, and we pick up on that. And then it's this big anger, and we think all of that anger is ours when only this much was originally ours. But we so easily picked up on the frequency of the person next to us because we were on the same radio station channel, you know. So a lot of times, if we're feeling something that's not ours, at least a little piece of it originally was the emotion that we were experiencing, but then it just gets amplified even more, the volume gets turned up. So we have other people. And then number 4 category that affects our thoughts and our emotions would be the collective consciousness on the planet. So not just one person, but maybe the collective of the city where we're living, or the country, the country where we're living, or the entire collective of humanity. So just thinking back, I'm not going to open up this Pandora's box all the way, but just thinking back a little bit to 2020 and how difficult that year was for everybody. You know, there was a lot of that scenario where there was so much fear, and anger and unrest and all those things going on in our local regions and our country and so on, that we were having our own feelings of grief and fear and et cetera, et cetera. And then, you know, pile these bricks onto us, because then we have the collective consciousness that we're feeling, you know, times our own feelings times what, how many people are on the planet? 4 billion, 7 billion, I forget, 4 billion. You guys can correct me in the comments, but anyway, a lot of people, several billion people. And So that's an example of how the collective consciousness of humanity can be affecting us. And then we have this other category, spiritual entities. And so a lot of times with the people that I'm working with who are learning how to find their power, sometimes for the first time, when they've had years of entity interference. And what they come to find out is that a lot of the thoughts and the feelings that they're having are actually coming from the entity that's been hanging out in their energy field, talking into their ear. Maybe the person might not be clairaudient where they audibly hear it, but it's received as a thought in their mind or a feeling that comes into them. And so then the person has to learn how to distinguish what's theirs, whether it's coming from the person in Starbucks, person in the grocery store, or the collective on the planet, or the spiritual entity or entities that they're working on learning how to clear. And so if they're having feelings, again, just like with the collective consciousness issue, a lot of times there's a kernel of their own authentic feeling that's in there, maybe some unhealed grieving or some anger or some unrest or whatever the feelings are. And then this entity attachment or negative energy issue that they're dealing with comes along and piggybacks onto that and amplifies that. And we actually sort of touched on this in the beginning, that people are more vulnerable. In my observation, people are more vulnerable to negative spiritual interference when they have all of the unhealed shadow, whatever you want to call it, unhealed wounds, because then the negative spiritual being can just hook right into that, turn up the volume. So you think you're going crazy because you're just having all these, just extremely negative thoughts, sometimes even, severely negative thoughts of depression and oppression, where originally it was just a tiny kernel. And then that entity comes in and turns up the volume. So those are just some of the ways that our thoughts and our feelings are not always our own. Sometimes they're distorted by our own unhealed wounds. Sometimes we're picking up on the frequencies of other people or other spiritual beings in the space. So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you 100%. I mean, this is part of why it's so important to master, and I'll keep referring back to the energetics because everything is energy. So when you do simple things like I get people to wet their whistle on manifestation and use things like the parking fairy, and hey, well, what does that really mean? I don't know whether you're familiar with this parking fairy, but
Yes. Yes.
so basically, it's a great way to sort of dip their toe in the pool. And so what does that mean? It means, okay, Shifu said the parking fare, okay, I'm driving to the Home Depot and I've decided I want a parking space out the front. But I'm not going to tell my husband that. I'm just going to think about it in my mind and project the thought form, and the universe will realize it instantaneously. And what happens is it happens so easily the first time people are like, oh, that's a coincidence. And then
Right.
by the 20th time, they're like, whoa, I think there's something here. Oh, no, it's probably because I want the parking space out the front. Everyone's moving in and out all the time. There's always going to be a parking space. Once you've done it 100 times, your humanistic, limited perception of reality is questioned. If you're not like completely removed from all things, you're going to go, there's something here. Now, what I remind people of, when you're emotional, you're suggestible. So how that really works, and being able to synchronize with the universe instantaneously manifesting your parking space, is because you're having a dismissed sort of like state of, oh, well, I'm not telling my husband, I don't care. I'm just thinking about it. It doesn't matter if it happens or not. And
Right.
there's a lot of power to that. This is the present moment, right? When you do this and you don't put your emotional content, as you would use the words, shadowing or overshadowing what is being perceived, the actual resonances happens immediately. You put the thought form out and it's realized instantaneously because you're not invested in it. And so this sort of thing is where you wet your whistle, but in actuality, that's the core of all stuff when it comes to energetics or manifestation, healing, magic. It starts there. And if you can really master the resonance and you're able to fall into that, anything can be realized. And so, sometimes point in check, when you have someone like myself that's been doing this a long time, I can operate in all dimensions at once very comfortably. That means that on face value, you could see me supposedly investing in my personality, having a reactionary moment to some sort of interaction, but in actuality, I'm operating in another dimension doing something completely different. And what's an example of that? Well, this recently happened to me, and police officers are fantastic for this. So I had a place I had to go, and my family and I were driving in the car, and I was 5 miles over the speed limit. This guy was clearly, feeling the resonance. I just wanted to get to this space. I need to go to this direction. In any case, he picked up on it. He pulled me over, and immediately the fear that he was using was my gateway to dissolve the situation before I even got out of the car. Now, I knew I was going 5 or 10 miles over. He knew I was going 5 or 10 miles over. His job was, I want to give you a ticket. But my personality wasn't really having it. I was engaged. If you looked at it at face value, you're like, well, he's dead in the water. He's completely emotional. There's no way he's going to get an outcome that he's looking for. I'd already circumvented it before he even got in the car. Now, how does that really work? Well, you have to be able to master the energy. So what happened was he approached the car in a sort of menacing, defensive, fearful state. I'm with my wife and my kids. He's like, wind the windows down. And so I'd already identified the emotional state he was in before he even exited his vehicle. And so that was the gateway to suggestibility. That's how it works. So he already has this idea in his mind, I'm going to be on the offensive, not defensive. And so he approached the car and I said, honestly, is there any reason why you feel as though you need to draw your firearm on my family? And that he opened the gateway up even more, because that's what he was thinking. And he didn't like the fact that I knew that. And he said, give me your license and registration. So I gave him my license and registration. We'd already circumvented the energy before he even got out of the car. Now, I was like, quite frankly, I don't understand why you pulled me over. So I'm creating a heightened level of confrontation, which works on his emotional state. And I've already entered a thought in his mind that's going to come to fruition in a few seconds. So he's thinking, this guy's combative, confrontive. He's confronting me. Give me a license and registration. I'm writing you a ticket. There's my license and registration. He walks back to the car, his car. By the time he comes back, he hands me my license and registration, said, thank you. I'm going to give you a warning this time. You have such a beautiful family. You have a very nice day. And so there are very many dimensions that are going on there, but this comes back to all thoughts of your mind are not yours. When you understand how to master these type of energies, you can access things at all different types of levels. Now, for me, all I'm working on is this guy is already in a state of anxiety and fear, and he's then applying that to his job. My personality wanted to get to a certain place, and that energy connected. I need to get there. I need to get there. Now, in most cases, if you don't have this type of training, you're going to fall victim to I got to get there. I put the information out there. It attached itself to this particular energy, and it showed me instantly what the outcome was. But if you can master and be able to be the present moment and operate in what is a multidimensional state, which is a mastery, there's no question about it, you can have a whole different outcome of what is taking place in that present moment. But it cannot happen any other way. It has to be that present moment. And so, yes, I'm going back to the thoughts of your mind and not yours. And they're very easily hijacked if you understand what you're doing and you can cultivate the energy to do that very thing. And so, of course, what does that happen? That happens in politics. Some of the most failed manipulators in the world are, NLPers that get a few key words that they think that they can use to manipulate. They so happen to be mostly politicians and people of an authoritative nature. These are the sort of people that my personality does not like. I don't like manipulators. I'm going to say it. This is my personality. All my students, all the people on this channel understand Shifu's difference between personality and high resonance. And so my personality has I'm a little, it incites me to want to help regulate that when I see a manipulator, especially using those type of tools. What I've discovered is most people gravitate to NLP for the only one reason, which is to manipulate. Most people say, oh, I want to learn it. I want to help people regress and fix their and heal their trauma. I don't see that. I haven't seen that yet. I see a lot of people that want to control and manipulate. And what is that? Hello, shake my hand. Huh? You know what? You know what? You know, and intuitively, it's what we call, from a psychologist's perspective, a heteroaction. You are, by nature, as a human being, have to, whatever you start, you have to finish. You're engaging in a loop, what we call a psychodynamic loop, that you're not even, you haven't even had a mission of validating. And so what happens with that? Someone puts their hand out and then you go to shake it. And you're like, why did I do that? Why did I shake that guy's hand? Why did I shake that woman's hand? Why? Because there's a level of domination that comes with that. And this comes back to the very foundation of what you've spoken on this whole podcast, which is being able to discern and affirm and be in the knowing of your own grounding, of your own self, not handing over, as you've mentioned, your power. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, as you were talking about politicians using NLP, and that like in your observation, the only people who study NLP are the ones who want to use it to manipulate. I'm going to assume there's exceptions out there that, maybe some viewers have, but I've made that same observation. And in fact, the third book that I'm working on right now is all about abusive and predatory spiritual teachers. And one of the things that I talk about is the mental manipulation and NLP and brainwashing. Like there's all these methods that are used to hypnotize people and to gain power over them in order to manipulate them to do what you want. And that's a misuse of power. The person is in a position of power, whether it's a politician, whether it's a leader, a spiritual leader. They're in a position of leadership, and they're misusing their power by trying to mentally and sometimes also energetically, spiritually manipulate people to do what they want. Maybe sign up for more and more things and pay more money, or whatever their agenda is. So that was what was going through my mind as you were talking about the NLP and the politicians and
the police officer deal. Well, I want people to also understand, I want to add to that, what was the end result? The end result was he walked out away feeling whole and more calm than he ever had.
That's a good point.
I always go high resonance. It's not from just distracting and commandeering someone's very thoughts. The outcome was my bad. I put it out there, and all I did was regulate it. And it showed itself instantaneously. And the more you master these skills, you can circumvent and redirect what it is that you have participated in consciously. And that's what happened with me. And I was operating in a much higher resonance than my personality. But from face value, people would be like, oh, well, he's dead in the water now. If you go by the principles of what Shifu is teaching me, you're all personality. But there's a high level of dimensional shifts that take place when you cultivate the energy and you are in the present moment. So it won't happen any other way. And of course, ultimately, he probably had one of the better days than he's had in his whole life because he felt whole. He felt open. He felt grounded. And that's part of the energetic healing that he received from me circumventing the very catalyst that created the situation to begin with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's a great story. It's a great example. And I know you mentioned about like how your personality self was all like, I got to get there, I got to get there, I got to get there, and that was part of what matched up energetically with this guy who was on maybe not the exact same wavelength, but it was still this like kind of overly aggressive kind of energy. And from a higher perspective, well, so from that personality perspective, you were you were being your personality, you were trying
Yeah.
to get there. But from a higher perspective, I think sometimes our personality is is doing things from a higher perspective, but we don't realize it because, like you said, I forget what word that you used, but you helped him to go on and have a better day in a lighter vibration that wasn't so heavy and constricted. I feel like he was constricted and overly tense, and that was where that aggressiveness was coming from. And so your personality self may have just been focused on getting there, but some higher aspect was really running the show and saying, let's create a scenario where there's this energetic matchup, where this police officer who's doing important work, he needs a little nudge to help him. And you ended up doing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
Yeah. It was
the,
like this like little universal positive interference.
oh yeah. No, I
Yeah.
agree with you. I mean, it kind of comes back to a spiritual awakening moment back in the 80s with this talk show host by the name of Oprah, and she had this guy on this really guy that not very few people know. This guy named Deepak Chopra was on her channel, and he, for the first time, really the world had seen this spiritual guru, right? And so she's sort of sitting there she's sort of basically diving into her spiritual awakening and alerting people to this greater nature of reality apart from this 3D reality. And I think that was part of a good service that she did for humanity. There's a lot of things I didn't really appreciate that she did, but let's just say that that was an offering initially that was with good intention. And so she's waiting and she starts the show, says, well, welcome back. And guess what I have on the channel today? I have Deepak Chopra here. How are you doing, Deepak? And he's like, this is like for the 80s, it just wasn't cutting it. Even with the Beatles bringing in psychedelics and, the Hare Krishna movement and, East coming to West and this whole revolution of ideas that are outside of the norm. I'm not, well, my body's here, but I'm not. And she went, I'll be right back after this commercial break. Because that was so out there to
Mm,
even grasp
mm,
just an idea, a concept of at that
mm,
moment in history. Now, if you went anywhere over the East at any point in history, spirituality and cultivation had been an intricate part of daily life. Whereas the West was sort of like attempting to digest this past this idea of, the religious construct that had been sort of subject for many, many centuries. This new revolution was starting up here in what we call a cycle. And now we're at another cycle from generation to generation. It seems to be every 20 or 30 years we have these epiphanies and we go in and out of all these sort of like ideas or theories or embodiment or belief systems, and that's perfectly fine. That's part of you being part of the collective, but you want to be aware whether you're part of a collective consciousness or a collective psyop. And so there's
mm.
there's like, and that's just part of mastering these skills that Maya and I share with you, is developing this ability What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, um, you know what? I don't have anything to add to, well, actually, you've brought up the subject of PSYOP a couple times. Let me kind of feel into what I want to say about this. So I don't know if you want to go down this rabbit hole. And then after that, I do
Yes,
need to
yeah,
speak.
yeah.
So,
I will go down any rabbit hole with you, my friend.
yeah, so I do think that now I don't know what you are meaning specifically by PSYOP, but I do think that there are so many levels of things that are happening on our planet. I mean, we've got um, humans that have all these different, like, personal agendas, collective agendas, government agendas, all the different agendas. Everyone has their agendas. And then we have spiritual beings that have agendas. We have non-human beings, um, physical beings, aliens, extraterrestrials. They all have their agendas. We've got interdimensional beings. They, like, everybody has their agenda. So from all these different layers of perspectives, when I hear the term PSYOP, I'm thinking of like surveillance and how we as humans are being watched. And I purposely bring up all these levels because I don't think it's just the three-letter agencies that watch us, but it's coming from all these different angles. And, sometimes when people have this first glimmer of realization about this, they feel very fearful and shocked and like, oh my God, there's people listening and there's beings listening. But for me, I don't know. I think it was in 2016 when I went through that particular major psychic attack that I spoke about in the beginning. That's when like the floodgates opened and I just realized that there were so many things going on that that sure feel very uncomfortable at first when we have those first realizations. But now, from my current perspective, it's like, oh, yeah, I'm not shocked by that anymore. I already know that that's what's happening. And I do some spiritual work to block things, but I also I do my best to not get into fear because these things, the PSYOP situation, from all these multiple perspectives, might indeed be happening, but we can also make the situation worse for ourselves by getting pulled away into fear, by freaking out about it. And so, do you want to add to that at
Yeah,
all?
yeah, yeah. No,
Okay.
I mean, I agree with you. That's the suggestibility, that's the gateway. And
Mm.
so, regress back to, a couple of years ago, and people were embodying a state of fear that was probably second to none, and we hadn't seen that type of level of fear
Yeah. Wow.
on the face of humanity in probably quite some time. Definitely not in the last 100 years to that degree. I mean, it's
Mhm.
it was propaganda time, and there was a lot of things that were going on. And I look at today and I think, okay, you know um I have a soft spot for people that truly are walking around still, you know, embodying that whole messaging and the understanding of what that meant to them. And in most cases, there's massive what you would call trauma, and it comes in the form of how they present themselves in society and what they wear, how they present themselves, how they perceive their reality. And that's a real thing. But then I also get to a point where my personality is like, okay, now we're in it 3 or 4 years. And as one of my favorite TV personalities would say, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. There's a certain point of accountability. Judge Judy, by the way, is the reality. It's like there's a certain point of accountability for your own healing. And with Lao Tzu, one of my teachers will remind you First point of healing is being accountable for yourself. And
Mhm.
so that comes with consciousness, that comes with the click, that comes with, finding Maya, finding myself, finding a starting point of realizing that what you're perceiving may not generally be of the highest best interest of your very journey. And so how do you decipher that? How do you step away from the psyop? How do you step away from the group think of manipulation? It starts with that. I mean, I had friends that spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the education of their children for them to turn around and point their finger at them as if they weren't embodying the messaging that was coming out of the events of the last couple of years. And because that they had a certain viewpoint. And if they didn't believe in the rhetoric that was coming out, the propaganda that was coming out, then they were this, and I'm this, and you're this, and this is how you're
Mhm.
supposed to perceive things. And that was a
Very,
mistake. Like they,
very polarizing.
yeah, they
Yeah.
couldn't believe
And
it.
almost like intentional,
Oh
like
yeah,
intentional polarizing.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
100%. But I mean,
Mhm.
people were just going with it. And so if
Mhm.
you didn't think that way, and if you were an ambassador of your own free will, which is really, it's an idea until otherwise noted. And I say that because let's just go with the margin of conscious to unconscious behavior. Once you start looking at those margins, you're initially being given the idea that you have free will. Your free will start the second you are aware that there is a variable of what is conscious and unconscious. And the more you embody the conscious state and you're able to collectively resonate there, and that comes in the form of brain waves, you can restructure and rewire the very perception of your reality and heal. But until otherwise noted, the margins are definitely not in the favor of someone that believes they have free will at face value. And that's where they always fall short. The annual, New Year's Eve, I'm going to get a better job. I'm going to stop eating ice cream. I'm going to work out. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And then a week later, you meet up with someone who just had all these proclamations of new reality, and they're back to eating the Cheetos. They're not exercising. They're watching Netflix. Well, what happened, John? I don't know. I just lost sight of anything that motivated me because you're arm wrestling with the idea that your free will is measured by your consciousness. And if your consciousness is being polarized by your unconscious behavior until otherwise noted, being given the tools to awaken yourself to the realization that you can embody it 100%, you will always lose that arm wrestle. And it's like just the fundamental understanding of that changes the way you look at things. It goes, well, what can I do to do that? Well, let's start with listening to Maya, listening to San Qing, having a greater understanding. Whatever your intuitive guide drew you to this information that we're sharing today, the conversation we're having, is bringing you a greater sense of awareness. But that mob mentality was so evident several years ago. It was, as you put it, polarizing and subject to a duality. And everyone was literally in a trance, beyond a trance, beyond a trance. And they just couldn't see anything. Their truth was so distorted. The dukkha was so off the charts. I mean, it was crazy. What do you
Yeah, it was like illusions upon illusions, kind of like um, spells upon the planet. And I'm not saying that, well, I think I am saying that on a spiritual level, I do think there was spiritual warfare happening,
think?
but then also actual people um, speaking in ways that were hypnotic, and then people were just, and people who were in fear receiving those messages. And it was really a wild time, wasn't it? I'm glad we're through that part of it. I know we're not through it. I mean, there's
Well,
still
I
these things
mean,
are still happening on the planet. I mean, we still have so much illusion and so much control. And so we're not out of that, but I'm really grateful we're not like in the thick of all of that we were experiencing in 2020.
well, yeah. I mean, I think people forgot what happened with World War II. I think
Hmm.
they forgot exactly how people ended up in this observing in many parts of the world that weren't engaged in the World War were observing,
Mm,
this incredible
mhm,
genocide. I'm sorry, it's like megalomaniacs. And so people fell in line and they
mhm,
forgot that, oh, how is that? Well, I mean, this seems like such a mild version of World War II. No, not really. I mean, there was like you're either in or you're out. And if you're not complying with the consensus that there's something fearful, then your rights as an individual, especially in this country, didn't exist. Your rights to freedom of making choices of your own physical making, and it was not there. You were expected to subject yourself to a physical violation because others told you that's for the betterment of the group. And that was just a complete manipulation on an emotional level. And now we have more than a body of evidence that would reflect that perhaps maybe the people that were a little bit more reserved and resistant to the group think may have had an intuitive understanding greater than what they could even consciously fathom. And that is evident today, in my opinion.
so true. Well, I want to thank you for having me on your show today. I think now is probably a good time to
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
because I need to eat dinner before I do a
Yes,
group healing session later. So,
absolutely. Yes, yes. Well, I just want to thank you for spending your time with me today, for coming on the podcast, for really embodying the messaging and the mastery that you've acquired over your years of your journey of awakening. What you have realized is another way to help people find themselves, and that was no coincidence, as you probably know and I know. And so I'm very grateful that you've come on the podcast. I will ask you one last question. What is your definition of consciousness?
oh gosh, consciousness. There's a few different directions that I could go with this, so I'm going to choose one. Because we could go like consciousness being equivalent to soul, okay? But I'm going to go a different direction with this. I'm going to say consciousness being aware, the level of awareness, how awake and aware and thinking and perceptive you are. And this is something that I'm in process of because I certainly don't claim to be like all knowing or fully awakened or anything like that. But um, I don't know if strive is the right word, but I work toward becoming more and more conscious every day. I am a truth seeker. So I literally go out to my backyard out in the southern Arizona Sonoran desert, stare at the mountains and the blue sky, and I ask to be for my energy to be opened for even more levels of consciousness and awareness. I ask to see beyond my personal shadow illusions, to see beyond the illusions that are really covering the earth, kind of relating back to our most recent subject. I ask to see beyond the illusions of the illusions of the illusions. I want to see the truth. Truth, of course, is there an ultimate truth? I don't know, but it's like I keep going to this next layer and the next layer and the next layer, and there's always more to uncover. There's some false information that's covering the truth. And so I peel that off and I look at the next level and then I go, yeah, and all of those levels are truth with a small t, but then we keep evolving and we find that next layer and that next layer. I see that as consciousness working to be more and more consciousness of truth and what's really reality, not our perceived reality based on our inner wounds, not the reality that's projected by collective consciousness or fear energy on the planet, but like actual reality. So I strive for a deep, I was going to say higher, but I'm going to say deeper, a deeper, more embodied level of consciousness and awareness and embodiment.
Well, that's beautiful.
Mhm.
I've never heard the same version. Yours is probably closer to what I just consider consciousness being aware you have choices.
Mm. Mhm.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
just
cool.
absolutely beautiful. So I want to thank you for all the time you spent with me today and the audience.
Mm.
I want to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I want to thank the audience for sharing their time with us today. And I am your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master San Qing. And I'll see you on the next one, guys.